This is the agreement, Chromatic Presences at the Zürcher Gallery. The premise of the exhibition is the bond created between sculptor and viewer using color, extraordinary color, not color that looks like anything, but sort of color that emerges from the imagination, and how when the viewer experiences this, it creates a different experience than were they looking at something that they recognize. So that was how I went about sort of trying to coordinate and bring together all of these artists who I feel, even though they have a diverse sort of collection of subtexts underlying the work, they do engage with color in a very specific and kind of imaginative way that really fulfills the idea of the agreement. This is a sculpture by Andrew Ross. The mic is mightier than the pen. It's made with laser cutting, so it's sort of 3D modeling. He uses models that are free and accessible on the net so that you can create your own forms. And then he creates these amalgamations, which sometimes are about sort of plumbing the darker depths of the net and what's available and what people are kind of these images and symbols that are in circulation. And so we have TV tubes, and we have hands, and we have an orc's head, and it's sort of an amalgamation of cultural imagery. But again, because the purple of the actual material of this foam, and then the green, and then the white, the color stands against the actual forms, and so we engage with the color in a way that maybe perhaps makes us look at the forms a little more carefully, but also makes us register that they are not attempting to sort of fool us in any way. They're instead trying to explain a situation that the artist has discovered, and it's an abstract premise that he's putting forward. Then Umlauf's May 10th, 1966 fulfills this idea of this color interaction where she's not afraid to take a painting and intersect it with a three-dimensional object. And she's also not afraid to deal with the roughness of the materials that she uses, and to be gritty and to be, in a way, kind of forbidding. I mean, the plexiglass that she uses actually has sharp edges. You wouldn't want to touch it. The paint itself is on paper that's been ripped. And so the textures of the materials really intersect with the color palette in a way that we are experiencing this on a certain degree like a painting, so an abstract sort of abstract expression of painting, but on the other hand, we are being forced to deal with it in 3 dimensions. So it's an approximation of dealing with that painter, the idea of the painterly in 3 dimensions. So I felt that really worked well with the project. So Kianja Strobert's tie is a very simple gesture, and in the context of the exhibition, it's all about this sort of very pure use of color and how the color can be embedded in the form without us necessarily understanding what the form is about. We know that it drapes, and it has a fabric quality to it, but it also is clearly some kind of material that's stiff. And so there isn't a lot of explanation going on beyond just the pure gesture and the color. So within what I was talking about with this show, I felt that when we interact with it, that's really the level that we interact with it, and then we try to build off of that. And the artist in her other works sort of also questions this idea of interiority, exteriority, flesh versus dead material, windows that don't look into anything. This one is orifice, and orifice, it's almost a pun. I mean, it's an object hanging on a wall, so there is no means of getting through it, but on the other hand, the premise is that the object is itself sort of a gateway. So that fit very, very nicely into the idea of the agreement that we make with the object to accept what it is granting us. In keeping with the general idea of the agreement, where there's a level of color that's being used versus a sort of a deeper meaning, Remy Jungerman's piece really engages with a much deeper cultural context that he works with in his art, in which he deals with the material, the kaolin or kaolin clay that is used in a lot of ritual and decorative processes in Suriname, and then he intersects that with the steel sort of aesthetic of Rietveld and Mondrian. So, you know, despite this having a tremendous seductive power as an abstract object, it also is a declaration of sort of negotiating colonialism, kind of creating a coalition of different ideas and forms and styles that is sort of part of the job of the artist. And it can also be read as a sort of simple geometric study that then integrates these formless objects or objects that use formlessness in a way that really creates a contrast between the two. This is Pulcinella by Giordano. He, besides obviously this intriguing use of color, he really likes to plumb the depths of sort of Italian theatrical culture. He's using Commedia dell'arte character, Pulcinella, who's a clown, who's sort of a ribald, obscene character, and he engages with that obscenity by adding in these sort of red, white, and green sacks, which could be testes. So he's creating something recognizable. There's also a pair of hands, but the totality is very abstract, and it's sort of a collection of symbols brought together by the artist. He's also very fascinated by Italian food, so a lot of his work is about cannolis and about cream and about cake, confections. So this piece really, the Pulcinella piece really brings together this idea of like the sweet and the salty, the kind of the dirty and the grittiness of entertainment and what we're coming to art to experience, whether it's some kind of sexual fulfillment or entertainment, or just a kind of vicarious, desiring of some kind of sweet treat or dessert. So, and then the base is a cast of a mushroom. So there's a lot of just collection of forms here that then are sort of farmed out and filtered into the object itself. This is Andrew Ross's Fight Loop sconce. Again, it's built up out of objects that he sources from the web and then prints out and uses to create these amalgamations. So there's actually sort of, he's using some sort of darker cultural signifiers here, which are either recognizable or not. There's a cartoony quality to the piece that kind of gives you an initial kind of comforting quality, but then you begin to realize that it has a political message, or it has a critique of a political message going on. So that also fit very well into the premise of the show, which is that the initial experience that you have with the work pulls you in, and then forces you to investigate the materiality and the symbolism within the work. So this is my piece, Set and Who. It's a sand cast hydrocal sort of shell. I work generally with archaeological themes. I'm very interested in the circulation of symbols. This is from a series that was created initially for Snug Harbor in Staten Island, which is a maritime museum. And this deals with the notion of burial ships, the idea of the ship being a place of safety as well as of danger, where they are kind of seen in many cultures as conduits to the hereafter, the beyond. And then integrating this idea of color, which was that very often, historically at least, or archaeologically, we tend to see things that are colorless because the colors have been bleached off. So I wanted to sort of engage very playfully with this idea of extreme color, juxtaposed with this sort of sandy, kind of masonry seeming background, and what that experience would be, like being buffeted or hit over the head with sort of very bright colors, which was sort of a much more common thing than we like to think about, and sort of in terms of human art history. So that was the origin of this is a sort of an experimental piece. So this is Lynn Umlauf's February 5th, 1988, which is really intriguing because in this piece she's completely disembodied the color and placed it on a sort of twisting, turning, tortured grid formation. So that the color kind of exists at these nodes, exists as these nodes of energy floating within this kind of interpretation, I would say, of like the Einsteinian universe of twisting in and of itself. So this really, again, utilizes color in this very, very specific, direct way where the color itself is almost it's a reason in itself for being. There's no need to kind of explain it other than it exists within this formation. So this is Ugo Rondinone's Green, Yellow, Blue Mountain. It's part of an ongoing theme in his work, heavily coloring natural forms to the point where they become these sort of wonderful, glossy, like delicious-looking objects that are that because they're so perfectly colored, they begin to have a kind of almost alien quality to them. He did a show just last year called Monks and Nuns, where he created these sort of giant sculptures that had a kind of human sensibility to them, and in the very least that they just were upright, horizontal, sort of in the way that Giacometti pieces are very, very horizontal and seem to have a kind of human quality to them, and they kind of were watching you. This is a much smaller version, but taken within the context of those pieces, it has a very kind of doll-like or sweet presence, and it makes us think, well, what does it mean for the top of the sculpture to have a blue head? What does that mean? And what about the green feet? It makes you assess a kind of emotional and theoretical ideology behind color. So that's what I really find intriguing about this piece. So this comes from Shervone Neckles' Domiciliation series. It's called the Bless This House wall hanging piece. And it may not be immediately obvious, but it's 4 sheets of vinyl, one of which contains this sort of beautiful goddess-like figure with a house for a head, and then it's overlaid, and behind it, it has these gold prints of these gold neurons. And so the figure sort of emerges from this sort of veil or this miasma, which we understand to be about connectivity and memory and the containment of data, but obviously in a living, breathing, biological sense. Then, we don't know this, but we can tell immediately that this figure is sort of a magical being. It has a house for a head. The house itself is Neckles' ancestral home in Grenada. And so this is also a mythological figure. It has a story that comes with it. It's not just about life or fertility or power, but we know that there's an origin story, and we know that this being has this narrative that goes with it. And one of the amazing things with this material, vinyl is a very interesting material for sculpture, but that we can see through the figure to what's behind it is also kind of magical. And then it casts shadows on the wall behind it. So it functions both as a sculpture, as a tapestry, as a text in a way. It has a sort of a very multivalent explanation that goes behind it. So these are Sanye's 2 untitled box sculptures. Within the boxes themselves, there's sort of 2 nondescript boxes. Is this kind of amazing rainbow treasure chest of objects. Sanye works with these forms that are made of clay, and she places them in different configurations, and they become a kind of language, a hieroglyphic language that kind of, we don't know what the meaning is, but we can tell that there is some kind of ideology being expressed or some kind of narrative being expressed. So that mystery is very, very exciting, and some of them are more free-form, others are more geometric, so they have a definite emotional impact and emotional statement that goes with them. And the fact that they're in these nondescript boxes gives them, again, this kind of mystery package that comes through the mail or Christmas present, something that you want to open, and because of the way that it's positioned, it leads us to believe that there is sort of an endless variety of these objects within here. So it also plays with this idea of longing and envy and desire that we can never have fulfilled, because we can't, obviously, we really can't touch it and go inside, but we can only imagine, you know, all the sort of magical treasures that are within it. So that also obviously fits very well into this idea of the sculptor creating this bond with the viewer, trying to lure them in and excite them with the work so that they, you know, begin to interact with it and ponder it. So this is a Tom Doyle sculpture from 1964-65, for which we don't know the title unknown. It's from a sort of unique series of pieces he did while he was on residency in Germany, where he was experimenting with adding color to the pieces. And this was one of the pieces that actually led to the organization of this exhibition. I was writing about these pieces, and it's as a sculptor myself, I feel like utilizing color in sculpture raises so many very interesting questions. It's not just about the material anymore, but it's about the emotion that you bring out from the works. And for Doyle, there's a very, you feel like there's a very organized utilization of color. He's making the base yellow, he's making the top this sort of dark red or reddish brown. And it raises all sorts of questions of whether it's a figure, is this a wing, are these different parts of the sort of this being that he's created? We can get an indication of what the materiality is too, which is wood and metal. So in the end, as an object, this piece is really what the entire show is about, which is, you know, utilizing this color to convey an idea or a philosophy that doesn't necessarily reside in color as we normally experience it, where we think of, say, trees with the leaves are green and the bark is brown. This is sort of a reversal of like this idea. So then we're forced as viewers to consider what the color means to us. Does it trigger any kind of cultural signifiers? Does it trigger any kind of literary signifiers? Doyle's work in color is particularly, I think, redolent of that idea. So this is Nancy Shaver's Looking for a Cup of Coffee. Initially, you know, it strikes you as a sort of a figurative object. It seems to have arms, it seems to have a head, and then she's very sort of, in a very fascinating way, has incorporated a mirror into the head so that if you're at a certain level, you actually will see yourself, or you'll see the room projected around you. So, you know, we initially engage with this as a figure, but then we also look at the mosaics that she's created and the accreted sort of forms, and it becomes kind of like also a repository of memory and a repository of images. So on a certain level, this is one of the least abstract pieces, in that we can kind of get our heads around what she's using these objects and colors for. But on the other hand, the question of what it symbolizes on its own as an object is very, very much more up for question. So this is Poppy DeltaDawn's piece, Lucky. She is very, very fascinated by the idea of fabric and the idea of cloth and the idea of weaving almost as an end in itself. So in terms of this exhibition, you know, the idea of the agreement, the idea of creating these sort of imaginary forms that affect our imagination. This is a wonderful piece because it is woven, it is created, and yet the form is very much about touch, it's very much about sensuality without necessarily being about practicality. So we begin to not only think about the colors, the sort of more orangey red and the deeper scarlet red as what they signify, blood or life, but also we begin to think about the idea of softness, about this idea of the sort of the wool or the yarn and its fuzziness. And you know, we're used to it in the context of something we might wear or something we might use, like a towel. But on the other hand, here it is kind of being expressed as a sort of a pure emotional experience. So that's, in a way, this does present this agreement of, or a reinvestigation of what we view our central responses to objects and to colors and to forms, why we have those responses and what those responses mean to us.